So I'm here in the house of Professor Andrew Briggs, Professor of Oxford. Professor, thank you very much for having us here today from ABC². And
it's a joy to welcome you back to Oxford.
Thank you. You probably know Professor Briggs is quite important for ABC². He was one of the main sponsors and defenders and promoters of the whole idea of having a Christians in Science in Brazil. So I'm personally very grateful to be here with you, Professor, today. And so first, tell us in our audience a little bit of yourself, your career, your academic path. Who are you?
Well, I'm Andrew Briggs. I'm the inaugural holder of the chair in nanomaterials at the University of Oxford. Nanomaterials just means small stuff. So the kind of experiment that we might do in the lab is to take one molecule, you can't get much smaller stuff than one molecule, and then connect two wires to it and put it in a device. And then to minimize the effect of thermal excitations, we cool it down to a colder temperature than anywhere in outer space that we know of, about a 50th of a degree above absolute zero. And then we look at how electrons flow one electron at a time through the molecule and what quantum effects might be significant and how we might be able to control them. So that's the kind of experiment that we do in the lab. I grew up in Cambridge.
Okay.
I came to Oxford for my first degree. Then I went back to Cambridge for my PhD at the Cavendish Laboratory. And then I also did a degree in theology. I think I'm the only professor of the physical sciences in Oxford who has a degree in theology, as far as I know.
In Oxford, the degree in theology.
That was at Cambridge.
At Cambridge,
yes. It's another university.
Yeah, they are rather like you are a citizen of two worlds, right?
Exactly so.
Okay.
And now I seem to be back in Oxford. And the research has started off with a growing interest in smaller and smaller things, which we could first of all examine by microscopy, and then increasingly one was able to use the microscopy to control them as well, until the devices become so small that the quantum states become significant, and that has become very important for the underpinning science of quantum computing. And one of the things we've been doing in the laboratory for 8 years now is, because the experiments are becoming more and more challenging, we realized that we needed to deploy the capability of machine learning in order to be able to control the experiments better. So we developed machine learning for quantum technologies, and that has become so successful that it's now in wide use in universities around the world. And to meet the commercial demand for it, we founded a company a couple of years ago, which has grown rather rapidly, and will launch its product on the 29th of August. The company is called Controlox, and it makes machine learning to accelerate the tuning and characterization of qubits, quantum computing.
Wow, that sounds very interesting. So, if allow me, I will make some quick questions, then some are dense and big questions, and I will finalize with some quick questions. Is that okay? So, Oxford or Cambridge? Just one. Pick one.
Oh, I love them both. I love Cambridge because it's been so influential in my childhood and in my PhD. And I love Oxford because it's also a marvelous place. And they happen to give me a chair, a statutory chair. So I love both places.
You couldn't pick one of them, right?
No.
Okay, so
it's like asking, do you love your father or your mother more?
Okay, okay. Good analogy. And one theologian that has shaped your thinking or it has been important in your own theological reflections? One theologian.
Well, I don't know that there's any one. Someone who's been hugely helpful to me in thinking about actually not just the intellectual side, but my career between science and theology is the late John Polkinghorne, who I started talking to at a time when he was moving from very distinguished career in science to ordination in the Church of England. And it was very helpful to talk with him, and I love his writings. But there are others who've been hugely influential as well. Some of them well known, like N.T. Wright and David Ford. Some of them not nearly so well known outside the UK, like John Collins, who I think of as he died sadly a year ago, as a very fine mind, but an extraordinary pastor. So there have been several people like that to whom I'm hugely grateful.
And by the way, when in your life it started your curiosity or interest in this dialogue between theology and science? How this became an interesting topic or matter for you?
Well, it's only very recently that I learned that you were supposed to call it a dialogue. I've never thought of it as a dialogue at all.
Okay, maybe a interaction. How do you prefer to frame?
It's never really felt like that to me.
Okay.
It's like sort of talking like about I don't know, a dialogue between walking and seeing or something. You don't think of that as a dialogue. You think of two aspects of living in this world. And so I grew up in a family where from the earliest age, it was part of family life that we knew and loved Jesus. Studied the Bible together as a family and went to church together as a family. So that's been there since the earliest ages. And well, I don't know when I first got excited about science. I can remember once as a very small boy playing with a tractor and telling my mother that I wanted to be a mechanic when I grew up. And I'm not sure whether you think I've become a mechanic, but that was there from an early age. And the two have just been integral to who I am and the way I think and what I do.
So you have made some major contributions to maybe not dialogue, but at least this field of science religion, right? So have some important books published by Oxford University Press. We have one of them, which is a marvelous book called The Penultimate Curiosity. But tell me...
And you were responsible for that translation, so thank you.
Yes, I was one of the people working in this. It's a very, very nice book. Probably one of the most enjoyable to read from our whole collection. I would like to hear about your last book that you told me it touches in this kind of hot topic of human flourishing. So what is the book about and why did you write it? Sorry.
Oh, well, it came about from a conversation here in Oxford, getting on for 6 years ago. And we were talking together about how one of the Templeton Foundations, Templeton World Charity Foundations, could how could it, with its resources, make the biggest impact? And the more we talked about that, the more the topic of human flourishing floated to the surface. And so that's since become a major part of TWCF grant making. But as I was thinking about that and reading about that, I realized how it resonated with, well, in a sense, everything that's ever been important to me. And I think that's right. I think that if you find people thinking or talking about what really matters to them, chances are they're probably discussing some aspect of human flourishing.
Yeah. And well, when we approach this field or this theme of human flourishing, we get many publications, right? So, what are the specifics of your book?
Oh, yes. So we started off by trying to ask what is human flourishing.
Okay.
And in the end, we segmented that into 3 dimensions, which are the material dimension, because it's hard to flourish if you haven't got enough food or healthcare or roof over your head. The relational dimension, because it's not good for people to be alone and lonely. Solitary confinement is a terrible punishment, which is internationally outlawed for more than 2 weeks, because we need each other. We've evolved to interact with each other and cooperate with each other. And then the 3rd dimension, it's difficult to know what to call it. We ended up calling it the transcendent dimension, but to reflect the fact this world seems to sort of call us beyond itself to something more, which manifests itself in different ways for different people. But I think anyone who isn't aware of that and hasn't responded to it is probably leading a spiritually impoverished life. So there are other ways to describe the different dimensions, but that's the way we chose to. And then we wanted to say, well, this isn't just suspended in free space with no visible means of support. So then we identified 3 pillars on which human flourishing rests, and we called those truth and purpose and meaning. And then in part 3 of the book, we tried to apply the principles in the book to areas of significant change that are taking place in the world. We're living in very uncertain times, and we're living in times where a lot's changing very fast. So we looked at the area of values. We looked at the area of changing patterns of religious commitment. And then one that's particularly resonated with a lot of people is the ways that we live in changing technologies. The 2 technologies we mainly focused on were artificial intelligence and gene synthesis.
Wow.
And if you take those 2, the details are completely different. Each of them has their own specific ethical issues. But the deeper you dig, the more you find the questions are converging, because they're converging on what are you actually trying to do? Why do you want to develop these technologies? What are they for? And again, the chances are that if you dig deep enough, you find that you want to use them to promote human flourishing, which is what the book's all about.
It's amazing. And well, when we touch to this idea of human flourishing, as you tell us, you're touching in the realm of values and meaning and purpose that are rather very hard things to measure. So I don't know if you agree, it is hard to measure human flourishing. But in your opinion, is our world flourishing or not?
That's such a good question. I mean, in a sense, it sometimes feels that the more important something is, the harder it is to measure it. Indeed. So we're rejoicing at the birth of your first child at the moment, you see, and yes. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And I've no doubt that you want to be a good father to your child.
For sure.
Perhaps that's one of the most important things in the world to you. How do I measure how good a father you are to your child? Do I measure it in meters or in kilograms? Or I don't know how you measure it. Yeah. So here's something that's really important, that it's very difficult to measure. So the fact that it's difficult to measure does not reduce the significance. Nevertheless, there is significant progress being made in measuring human flourishing. So, for example, the extraordinary polymath scholar in Harvard, Tyler Vanderveer, is currently undertaking, I think it's a $43 million project to measure human flourishing around the world.
Wow.
And that project's still in progress, but I think he will produce data that will be useful in evaluating these things. And let's hope that as we do measure it insofar as that's possible, we produce criterion whereby to promote human flourishing.
Very, very interesting. So do you have any current projects that are animating you in terms of this dialogue, or I'm sorry, these aspects of life in science and religion?
That's so kind of you to ask, because for some years now, I've been working at the development of a science commission for the global Anglican Communion.
Wow.
So the Anglican Communion is one of the larger groups of churches around the world. Depending on how you count the numbers, it's reckoned to be 85 million members in 165 countries. And for about 5 years now, I've been working with the senior leadership of the Anglican Communion to, the vision is for the global Anglican Communion to give confident and courageous thought leadership in issues involving science. And that's sort of as a two-way process. So on the one hand, in the one direction, as it were, it's drawing on science as a God-given resource for the life of faith and for the work of the church. And then, as it were, in the other direction, it's offering the wisdom of faith and the voice of the church to issues involving science and the technologies that arise. And the technologies that arise from science. And that's now gaining considerable momentum. It was formally launched at the Lambeth Conference last year, which is a meeting normally every 10 years of Anglican bishops around the world. And on the second Saturday morning, we had 560 bishops from around the world.
Wow.
Sitting at tables of 6 or 8 to a table, discussing how science is relevant to their work as church leaders. And it was very remarkable, very exciting, and we're now busily following that up and maintaining and accelerating the momentum.
That's amazing. Professor Briggs, I want to tell you and our whole Brazilian audience that we thank God for your life. We acknowledge the importance that you personally had to launch the Brazilian Association for Christians in Science. We always remember you, your vision, your passion, your dedication. You, for us in Brazil, like a important friend, mentor, and a figure of inspiration. So thank you very much for all you have done and all you is doing right now. And please receive from Brazil a strong hug for us. Thank you, Professor.
It's very kind of you, and I am amazed and delighted at all you've done and the way that ABC² has grown and developed and influenced people for good in Brazil. And so for me personally, it's a source of great joy. So thank you for all that you do there.
Wow.
And I think in Portuguese, help me, there's a sort of word of greeting or farewell at the bottom of letters, which is to do with giving a hug. Is that right?
Yes, we say like a strong or a hug from your friend and a sign.
I love that. I think it's a wonderful idiom.
That's nice. So I hope to meet you again here in Oxford next year. Who knows?
We look forward to welcoming you back soon.
Okay, thank you, Professor.
And greetings to all of you at ABC².